real or fake, our democracy. Excited to have everybody here. We are going to be recording this meeting. So if you'd like to hide your video, feel free. If you'd like to be on screen, feel free. Just wanted to let everybody know. And we're going to move forward. Quick note that thanks to Shawn Merriman Roberts for being here as our ASL interpreter for this event. If you need ASL interpretation, click somewhere on Shawn's screen, I think the top right of the window, there's 3 dots, and pin video so you can see Shawn at all times. And when we get to the breakout room session later, Shawn will be in the What's Next breakout room, so join them there at that point. A few community agreements to get started, which we do at all of our meetings for CDP. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask CDP members to go down the list one at a time and say them, and just a quick explanation. Feel free to unmute yourself, CDP members.
One diva, one mic means only one person can speak at a time.
Be aware of time. Yeah, it's kind of straightforward. Just make sure that we're taking care of each other's time. Be efficient.
Be curious. So have an open mind when you come into conversation.
Distinguish between intent and impact. Your intention may be different from your impact, and it's important to recognize the impact that you have with what you say.
Communicate for community, but speak for yourself. This means that if you notice anything that makes you uncomfortable, feel free to speak up, because we do want to create a space that feels like people are encouraged to participate. But also, please only speak from your own experience and don't try to make assumptions about what others may be feeling.
Very simple and very important to CDP is no one knows everything. Together we know a lot. We all have gaps in our knowledge, and together we make it better.
Move up means if you're used to being in a speaking role, move up into a listening role. And if you're used to listening or not talking a lot, move up into a participation role.
I could do the last one. We can't always be articulate, and that might be true today for me, but it's okay. We can just sort of like express ourselves as best we can and receive it. All right. This is a statement that we also start at and share at the beginning of each of our meetings. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it so that it applies for this webinar conversation hour today. So we are committed to supporting our volunteers and maintaining a space free of harassment and oppressive power dynamics. If someone or something is or has been harmful or upsetting for you, we want to know. We will make space for discussion. We will think critically about any incident so that we can support growth and learning without tolerating bullshit. And to make that a little bit more real, we also have a conflict resolution team. So if there's anything that you see or hear or experience on today's meeting that you would like to share with us or process, you can email us at communitydemocracyproject@gmail.com, and we'll be able to take it from there. So a quick intro and framing for our conversation today before we get into a panel that we're all really excited about. Then we'll have breakout rooms where we'll be able to talk about kind of what we want to do next after hearing the conversation, a little bit more deep dive in the CDP if you're interested, and also signature gathering. And so I'll share a little bit more about them, and you can just keep these in mind as we're going through the conversation of which one you want to be a part of. But you'll be able to choose which breakout room you want to be in. There'll be a little box at the bottom of your screen that says breakout rooms. And when we open them later, then you can select which room you want to be in. The what's next is kind of brainstorming, what do we do next? How do we support some possible campaigns around what we talk about. CDP 101 is learning about how to get involved more and bringing up people's budget to Oakland specifically. And then the signature gathering room is going to be learning more about signature gathering, kind of hearing tips from people who have done it, and connecting more with C4C, who you'll hear more from during the panel as well. So quick intro about CDP, Community Democracy Project. We're an all-volunteer campaign to put anyone who lives in Oakland who's over 16 years of age, which includes undocumented folks and formerly incarcerated people, in charge of the city's budget. Right now, the mayor and few city council members basically decide the budget, and we want everyone in Oakland to have a say. Been around for about 10 years almost, canvassing, kind of knocking on doors, signature gathering for previous campaigns. And we hear a consistent message that people want to defund the police and reinvest in the rest of the city, essentially. Education, infrastructure, job training, youth programs. Really, it's about engaging people in participating and creating the Oakland that they want, that all Oakland residents want. And part of the People's Budget Initiative, which you'll hear about a little bit more, includes really empowering communities to engage more by creating neighborhood assemblies, and you can hear more about that a little bit later. Just to share over the years, this is kind of a representation of what we've heard. That's from a survey that we did recently that about 300 people almost responded to. And so you can see the current city budget in the red part of the bar graph, and the purple is what residents of Oakland have said they want to prioritize in terms of investment. And so if you want to fill out the People's Budget Survey and add your voice to this, it's great to continue to hear and kind of like see and communicate what Oaklanders actually want for their city. You can go to this link, bit.ly/Oak People's Budget, and fill it out and read more about how we created the survey. And even if you're in Oakland, go down to Lake Merritt and see the mural that we painted as a result of the survey. You should check it out. Before we get into the panel, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the initiative process, because that's kind of part of what we're going to talk about today. So just to share, the process was created in 1911 in California. California wasn't the first state to do it. There were, I think, 10 other states that already had it. And this governor, who kind of ran on a really like populist platform, progressive at the time, wanted to counter the power of the railroads at the time that were really kind of running the show. And so really promoted and ran on this campaign to create the initiative, referendum, and recall process. By the way, being a populist and a progressive in 1911 didn't mean you weren't racist. He was still racist because he also signed into law the Alien Land Laws of 1913, which prohibited people of Asian descent to own land in California. But, so it wasn't perfect. He wasn't perfect. But one of the first initiatives that was passed was to abolish poll taxes, which was pretty cool. But over time, because there weren't safeguards, wealthy individuals and companies came to dominate the process, so much so that this past election cycle, we saw like more spending on initiatives, campaigns than ever before, by a wide margin. It was a total of almost $740 million just on the initiative campaigns. And for one of those, Prop 22, that hopefully you'll hear more about from Assemblymember Alex Lee, they spent $200 million on just that one initiative. So the question that we've been asking is really like, how do we re-legitimize this process that was intended to give people the power, but hasn't really worked out that way for a bunch of years now. And from our experience with the People's Budget campaign, this like really is highlighted for us. So just to share, in 2019, which was our most recent campaign to get the People's Budget Initiative on the ballot in Oakland, we needed to gather almost 40,000, 36,700 valid signatures just to get on the ballot. And we gathered over 40,000, but ended up with a real count from the city back of 37,000. But that was the total, and many of those were not valid, so we weren't able to actually get on the ballot. And kind of what we learned was that the requirement to get so many signatures on a timeline of just 6 months, and with ours being a grassroots volunteer-led campaign, is the reason why we've never had in Oakland an all-volunteer initiative get on the ballot, which is a problem. So some of the lessons that we learned is that really the price of admission to actually participate, to have our voices heard through this process, this direct democratic process, is just too high. And then add on top of that, we were really stoked to start a 2020 campaign, but then COVID, and if gathering signatures in person is the only way to do it, which it is right now in California, then there was no way that we were going to be able to run a campaign, which is what led us down this conversation to where we are today, having this forum with you all. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if we lose the initiative process altogether, you know, even as much as corrupt as it is right now, we're giving up kind of this really possibly important tool to self-govern ourselves in the current political system. So we've been talking about some ideas that I'm, you know, excited to hear what the panelists think, which is to potentially make some changes to make this process work for us. And so one is allowing e-signature gathering. Other cities and states have temporarily done this in the wake of COVID. People in California have actually been trying to have this happen, but they're limited to just during the time of COVID. So because people are really seeing a need to adjust processes in response to the pandemic, now is actually a great window to try to make some of these longer term structural changes. Lowering the signature gathering threshold for people-powered initiatives. This is basically because, yeah, corporations aren't the same as people. And right now we have to gather the same number of signatures through a volunteer-led process that a corporation can just sort of like one wealthy person can just pay $7, $8 a signature and have an initiative that's just from the, you know, their one brain rather than the sort of collective wisdom of a group of people get on the ballot and have us vote on it. Lowering the age to 17-year-olds to be able to allow them to sign petitions and also gather signatures. A bunch of school districts are, you know, reducing the age of participation to get younger people engaged and hear their voices. So this is one great way to do that as well. And then the last, which may seem a little bit off to the side, but is to require all signature gathering firms to be worker-owned cooperatives. In large part because what they're doing is furthering democracy. So if those firms are themselves not democratic, how are they going to do that well? And also because signature gathering firms often really rely on independent contractors who have no employment protections and are paid a just per valid signature rate that incentivizes them to prioritize the ones that are paying the most, which is totally reasonable. But if signature gatherers had more say in their workplaces, then they would have, you know, workplace democracy that they'd be practicing as well as promoting through their work. And you'll hear from what we think is the first worker-owned signature gathering firm during the panel, which is about to start now. So that was the whirlwind tour of why we're having this conversation, and I'm excited to turn it over to Blake to facilitate our guest speakers.
Thank you, Neil. My name is Blake. I'm also a CDP member. I've been a member for about a year, and we're about to have our panel with our discussant, our guest speakers. So first, let me introduce Chris Chu. Chris is one of the founding members of C4C. Again, one of what we believe to be one of the first worker-owned. Hi, Chris. Thanks for turning on your video. The first worker-owned signature gathering firms in California. We also have Assemblyperson Alex Lee, who recently introduced some legislation to get money out of corporate money out of politics. Thanks for joining us. We also have Nicole Derse from 50+1 Strategies, a founder who also has a very recent experience on working with Prop 16, the affirmative action proposition in the 2020 campaign. And finally, we have representing Community Democracy Project, Shawn McDougal. He's been a fantastic member, and he'll be able to fill us in some more on CDP's efforts. So first, to start us off, I think I'll ask a question to Nicole, because you have the most recent experience with 50+1 of some of the challenges with the failure of Prop 16 and the affirmative action. Nicole, what do you think in general about the initiative process, and what are some of the hurdles that you faced as a larger organization?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks so much, CDP, for all the great work that you guys do. I am a huge fan of all your work, and just really believe in it. So it's great to be a part of it. Where to start? I would say a couple of things. First of all, just my background, I've worked on campaigns most of the last 17 years. So I've probably worked on at least 50 ballot measure campaigns, a good chunk of those being from the signature drive effort. Lots of winning stuff and some losing stuff, everything from housing initiatives to arts initiatives to, youth voting rights to racial equity stuff. So I would say there's a few things that I think are just generally the case when it comes to campaigns. There's really a few things that you never get more of, right? One, and the biggest piece of that is time. And so I think for a lot of these campaigns, what we find is that there's just not enough time and not enough resources to be able to be successful. Prop 16 is sort of unique because it actually got on the ballot through the legislature, not through signatures. So, in California statewide, you can either collect signatures, which now you need almost 1 million signatures, like 995,000 or something. To get on the ballot statewide, or you can have 2/3 of the legislature decide to vote to put something on the ballot. And what happened with Prop 16 was, it's kind of this amazing alignment, when George Floyd was murdered, and there was a real awakening in this country around racial justice. A lot of the legislators were pushed to take action and to do something about systemic racism and gender inequality. And so they were motivated to put Prop 16 on the ballot. I think, we knew it was an uphill battle there. Our polling kind of always showed us that we started off in kind of the mid to high 30s of support for bringing back affirmative action in California, and what it was going to take to get voters to agree to do it was, a lot more time and a lot more money. So we're sort of a unique, and it'll be great to hear about from Assemblymember Lee about Prop 22, but it wasn't that we were outspent in this situation, but I really do think that, our biggest enemy here was both confusion, but also just the clock. So when it comes to campaigns, we often just need to have a lot more time to be able to build up and to be able to allow for folks to understand the depth of the issue, to get involved in it in a meaningful way, to really elevate the voices of those who are most impacted. An example of that, which just came up so short, just barely short, was Prop 15, the Schools and Communities First initiative. They actually had been organizing for nearly a decade, and really, a great example of having grassroots organizations that were really rooted in communities doing electoral work, knocking on doors over years. And I think that COVID really hurt that campaign. We were a little less involved, but somewhat involved there too, where we had to be able to step back from great organizing work that was happening on the ground and move into digital organizing, which is a really tough pivot. So I think this election we faced, some big disappointments. Part of it was the lack of time. Part of it was, the corporations outspending the community in some of these examples. But part of it was also just being in the situation of COVID and the economic crisis that folks are in, and kind of the fear that people had around change or taxes. And, that's something we're always going to come up against. But if I had to ask for anything, I would say, in addition to some of the reforms, as we'll talk about in a minute, is just more time to build a campaign, and to do it in a much more methodical way that allows you to to have real leadership in the community. And I'll turn it back to you, Blake. I did want to just acknowledge my fabulous colleague, Juhi Gupta, who's here as well. She'll be speaking in the breakout sessions, but Juhi's an amazing organizer and designer. So happy to have her with me too. Thanks, Blake.
Cool, thank you. Thank you for sharing. My next question is for Shawn, one of the founders of CDP, a founding member. Similar to many of the issues faced that Nicole discussed, when we're talking about direct democracy, we're really talking about people's lives. Prop 15 would have funded schools, the general fund, so much more services directly impacting people. That's what CDP and their participatory budgeting initiative is all about. How do you see direct democracy in CDP's goals aligning with the initiative process?
Yeah, well, thanks, Blake, and thanks to everyone who came, and Nicole, is great to hear your wisdom from your recent experiences, and it's always good to be in conversation with you. So I think one of the things, and just to piggyback off of something that Nicole mentioned, is the time issue. Part of the challenge is that we face is that we don't have a culture, a practical culture of democracy in this country, right? We're trained how to be good consumers, right? How to shop. We're inundated with information about consumer options, right? We're trained how to be good sort of sports spectators, right? We're inundated with statistics about the various players and teams, right? But we're not in our society inundated with information about policies that impact our everyday lives, right? We're not inundated with information about how things work, how our communities work. We have, if we're lucky, we get a civics class at some point in high school amongst all the, but then like we quickly forget it because we have to. And so part of the goal of CDP is not just the budget in Oakland, but really shifting the culture to a culture of participation so that people's default, when Nicole and other folks are talking to them about Prop 16, or we're talking to them about Prop 15, or whatever, it's not moving from zero, trying to get them to move from 0 to 50 in 6 months, but they've already been having these conversations because there's a culture of democracy, a culture of people talking about the issues that affect them. And so, so part of the CDP's initiative, a big part, is building in that culture with the neighborhood assemblies, empowered neighborhood assemblies that meet on a monthly basis, where folks develop the habit of democracy as a muscle, of discussing the issues with each other, debating, seeing the various perspectives, thinking about trade-offs. And so it's not, they're not inundated with alien information when campaigns roll around and say, hey, vote for this initiative or that initiative. They actually have more context. So that's kind of the long-term sort of changing the political ecosystem picture of community democracy project. And frankly, and another relationship to that is that, you know, part of the challenge for initiatives is so much of public conversation and public space is dominated by private interests, right? So when you're gathering signatures, people think that the owners of Ralph's or the manager at Pack and Save has more say over whether you can gather signatures, right? Those of us who've done that know, right? So it's private property uber alles, right? Again, because we don't have democracy, right? We have corporatocracy. So shifting that culture so that regular folks sort of understand that we all are co-creators of this kind of political system that we're engaged in. That's not just hoping that the Democratic Party or some, you know, superhero team of hardcore activists, woke activists sort of fix things for everybody, but it's really about. And so I don't know if that's directly answering the question, but yeah, look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks.
That's perfect. That leads me into my next question perfectly. You're talking about changing the ecosystem, and my next question is for Assemblymember Alex Lee. Recently introduced the Clean Money Act in the state assembly. And this kind of speaks to the whole changing ecosystem, change how much, not only we have these barriers of time to getting initiatives on the ballot, but also money. In Prop 22, as everybody knows, that ensconced gig workers as independent contractor status had $200 million spent on that. So Alex Lee, I'd like to ask you about what you clearly have introduced legislation around getting money out of politics. Do you see that intersecting with kind of the initiative process at all?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first I'll say, thank you for having me on the panel. It's a great honor to be on here and get to meet all the wonderful activists who really are making our politics not just spectator sport, but making sure that everyone's actively engaged in it. That is so, so important in it. It's not just the elections come every November or even every June or March when we have them, but it's about the ongoing process. And, Prop 22, I think, is an epitome of many failures in our democracy right now. It's an example of where big tech corporations could just literally buy their own code sections, where they use their campaign, they use their apps to campaign. Though we're only less than a month into the new Prop 22 laws taking effect, you're already seeing layoffs, you're already seeing rate charges, all the things they said that wouldn't happen, they're doing it, right? And they spent so much money on the process to misinform people. And so on December 7th, the day I was sworn in, I introduced my Clean Money Act, which is Assembly Bill 20. And what it does is aiming to take out corporate special interest money in our politics. Now, specifically, it does two things. It builds a publicly financed election system so that everyday individuals can contribute in elections, and it doesn't have to just be, wealthy folks or people who have the means to do so, right? It's ultimately our tax money, and we should be able to use it to contribute to our own democracy. And then secondly, which is very important, is it will also ban corporations from donating to candidates. Now, I had wanted to do it to be ballot initiatives as well, but unfortunately, just the culture of this country is there is a Supreme Court case for everything, and explicitly there is one that bans us from doing it for committees that are ballot measures. So unfortunately, we couldn't do that. But it is so important that we are mirroring exactly what the federal government does. So your members of Congress already can't take money directly from corporations. We should have that in the state. And that goes for city council members, whether they be in Oakland or in Fremont, or they'd be for state legislators like myself, or for the governor of California. I think it does a great disservice to our democracy when there is even the appearance of influence in their decision making based on contributions, right? I think there's an undeniable influence in that, and even just the appearance of it does a disservice to us. And one way or the other, I'm really afraid about how corporations right now have such an undue amount of influence, whether they can disinform voters at the ballot box, they can buy influence, or they can use their apps, they can use their own platforms to campaign, as we have now set the precedents for, right? I think it was interesting because I think there definitely should have been more oversight about this, right? When Uber, Lyft, all of them use their own apps to campaign, because you can imagine what kind of uproar society would have, right? If Facebook, which is also in our state and also near my district, or Twitter were saying, vote for Joe Biden or vote for Donald Trump, right? That would have been an uproar. And yet we did not have the same criticisms of companies that literally were putting laws for their own self-interest. They might not have the partisan veneer or the partisan colorings to things, but it certainly was of their own self-interest. And I think the regular person, if you talk to them on every day, would have had a lot of problem with that. But unfortunately, they got away with a lot of loopholes in our campaign financing system and our campaign disclosure laws and just the way they do things. And they misinform voters, unfortunately. And we're still feeling the effects of that today. As a state legislator who is also just elected in this cycle, who I also tried to do what I could for Prop 15, Prop 16, and against Prop 22, it is very disheartening to see that it passed, right? Because even they're very clever and devious. They put a 7/8 amendment measure. So if we want to roll back any of these heinous laws on gig workers and the gig economy, we'd have to get 7/8 majority in the legislature. And there's no other law like that. There's no other law like that, and they just slid it in there and hit it, and so it's very clever. So anything less than another full repeal on the ballot is not gonna work. So we're gonna have to be very creative about this to protect our workers, especially those who are most exploited on the margins of the gig economy. And I'm gonna be certainly always looking at that, especially as a member who's from the Silicon Valley. So again, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, thank you. And the next question, again, I love how everybody's answers are just weaving this beautiful story. There's all these challenges. We need to change the ecosystem so that we have more participatory direct democracy. Some of those challenges are getting the money out of politics, but we can also need to envision the better future besides just fighting against the evil things that are happening. That leads to my next question for Christopher Chu, one of the founding members of C4C, Cooperative for the Community, a all worker-owned signature gathering firm. and I would like to hear about, your experiences as one of the members of the signature gathering firm, how it went in 2019, and what do what did the worker owners feel, and how do you envision that creating a better initiative process in the future?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm outside, so I might step in just so I don't have so much feedback. But yeah, honestly, I just wanted to say, like everyone else has said, really grateful to be a part of this conversation and to hear the wisdom from others and their experiences. Yeah, as I'm wearing my shirt right now, Cooperative for the Community. We made it in 2019, and I just, at least the thing that comes to my mind immediately is what Neil said earlier in our conversation. So let's bring it back full circle, which is it makes so little sense to have people who are making policy and laws like not be more democracy, right? Like I feel like we were competing with like big money, and we were trying to get people to work for something that was beneficial to them. And the majority of people that worked on our campaign were from Oakland, right? So that was really empowering to me as a person born in Oakland, that we were working with something together that was very communal, and yet how easy it was to have people bring state money and so, like just like all this money, and then people are trying to survive and live. And so at least to me, that was like very I think Alex said it, like disheartening or something. It's like trying to figure out how to keep our own community like ready to be like wanting to engage on what was better for us than what was like capitalistically more beneficial for us, which is again, these big corporations would come in, and again, we like did our research and our homework as a co-op and made sure that we were trying to make sure our people were going to be paid well or comparative. And they just kept raising it over us, and it was like almost really hard to know that when you even could be actively intentional about setting goals to be helping each other and being communal, that big money just comes in and it's like, we'll just make it $1 more than y'all. Like, and so again, it makes it that much easier for people to be like, well, how do I prioritize that when this, again, 3 of these will cover that easily. And plus, again, so like it just made the system. But again, then it brings me back to like what it did mean to me, which is I think people, like Neil said, had more drive and passion to do the work with us. So the people that we got that were involved with our co-op, I think really showed up, kept pushing and grinding, that we have people that we can move forward with as far as doing this work with. And so that was really inspiring. And it makes me think of even answers that we're overlapping with other people, which is like, it gives us that notion, like the co-op feel is like, again, right, it's community, right? And so like, it makes a lot of things a lot easier. If people are being heard in a space, I feel like it's a lot harder to, again, feel like you're being subjected to like oppressive work mentality, right? Because you are part of the conversation by nature. So like, it's a lot harder to just be like, oh, I don't get a say, or I don't have, like, I just had to like survive through this oppressive mentality and culture that, again, at least in my like 15 other jobs that I've worked in the last 7 years, have definitely always had that, every single one. And so I think this is the first time me being a part of Cooperative for the Community where I even also felt really, again, always heard, like wanting to have people be respected. As a person of color, it just was like a culture that really deviated from every other work experience that I've had. And I believe it matters, especially when you appreciate it, what the value of signature gathering is supposed to be doing, right? Like, this is our democracy, and it should be not leadership that's like, oh, only the wealthy get to decide. Only, what I mean? Like, I don't get why we have the current system being the way that we let legally people facilitate our policies and stuff. So, I mean, again, I think we definitely need to get it, as Alex said, out of corporations, and really, again, if again, be more cooperative or communally based driven actions. Hope that answers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Uh, again, the flow. You were talking about when people participate in democracy, they have ownership in both their work, but as a co-op member, an owner, but then also they have ownership and connection to their community, because many of the CDP members know when you're out there gathering signatures in your community, you interface with so many people, and the connections and conversations you have sometimes are very, very strong and can bloom and lead to other things. And I'd like to ask Shawn, how do you see, making the initiative process simpler for community organizations? How do you see that as building up um, the participatory politics and democracy that we really need in this age?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've realized, and I think a lot of us have realized, and that's why we're all here today, in our various kinds of organizing work, is that the community, there's so much wisdom, right? There's so much insight, there's so much experience. We have the solutions, we have the ideas, we have the passions in the community, right? The answers lie within the people, right? There's not, we don't need some Steve Jobs or whatever, Elon Musk or Bezos, whatever. We don't need some kind of like whatever, like billionaire icon to save us, right? When you go door to door in the neighborhood, you talk to enough people and you realize there's diversity, right? And there's always going to, I mean, democracy is messy, but if the people have a space to get their ideas out there and their passions out there, then the solutions will follow, right? And so if, for example, it was easier for all volunteer campaigns to get on the ballot, whether it was like you go through some certification process or whatever, right? So that the number of signatures you need is lessened, or you have more time or whatever, there'd be the conversation, right, in our country about what issues matter would be radically different, right? Part of what happens in our messed up ecosystem, so it's not just about the corporations, but it's also about the two-party duopoly, right? But there's so much control over political discourse, over even what's allowable as a reasonable idea, right? And so, you guys all understand this, right? We've seen a rightward shift, even the Democratic Party from the time of Reagan, right? So you shift the spectrum, the window of what's allowable political discourse. If the people in the community whose voices are right now silenced, if they had a say, right? If their perspectives, if the initiatives on the ballot weren't coming from the Ubers and Lyfts of the world, but instead were coming from the people with the brilliant ideas who are in the community, then that would the conversation would be completely different. So that's, I mean, it's to me, it's a no-brainer, right? To make democracy real, get more people involved, bring more perspectives. And it's going to be messy, it's going to be challenging, because we're so used to kind of like models where it's like a few smart people who figured it out for everyone else. But shifting that will actually make us healthier as a society.
Cool, thank you for that answer. I'll just say that we have about 4 minutes left on the panel, and I'd like to get Nicole and Alex one more opportunity to speak each. So Nicole, recently Consumer Watchdog released the Sea Change report about e-signature gathering potential in California. Do you have any thoughts about e-signature gathering and other potential avenues for making the initiative process more democratic and not so controlled by money?
Yeah, awesome. Well, one thing I want to make sure you guys know is that there is a really interesting thing happening in California right now that's making it easier to get taxes passed. So through the initiative process, if you get collect enough signatures and you put something on through the initiative process, you can actually do a tax measure at 50+1 as opposed to 2/3. So I just want to say that's really important, because that dramatically changes how easy it is to pass local taxes in California. So everyone should be following that. E-signatures, I'm a huge fan of. I think there's absolutely potential in doing that. I think now is the time to move on that. There's interest in the legislature, there's leadership there, should move on that. A couple of other things that I think would help. We need to get foundations and funders to start to pool funds for signature collection, because there are funders that would be interested in this, and there's not enough pressure being put on them, whether it's like the CZIs of the world or the San Francisco Foundation or the California Endowment. There needs to be a fund that people that are doing people-centered initiative projects can actually try and get funding for signature gathering. I think that's something that really needs to happen. I think the 17-year-old piece is really doable, without a doubt. And then I think more time for collecting signatures. I think it would be kind of difficult to have different thresholds for the number of signatures, depending on if you're a volunteer-led or if you're not, because, as we saw with Chris's Cooperative, ideally we do want to be paying people in the community to be able to do this. So, because we want to be able to give people meaningful jobs to work on something meaningful. But I do think more time is something that can and should be fought for. So I could say a lot more, but I know we're out of time.
Thank you. And last thing, kind of the same question for you, Assemblymember Alex. What do you see as potential paths forward in making our democracy more direct?
Yeah, well, I've definitely heard some really fantastic ideas on the call today. But one thing that I think I want to stress about, and I've seen reforms, especially on the signature gathering front before, is that, we should obviously, the process should not be easy, right? Because you don't want to be exploited by corporations. You don't want to be exploited by nefarious means, but it should be a fair process, a fair fight for everyone. I have been a fan of reforms that have had requirements of making sure that their signatures are gathered by grassroots organizations or community-based organizations before. I think that's an important aspect to it. So it just can't all be paid signature gathering efforts, right? That's how Prop 22 got on the ballot, how it deceived people. You don't want it so that just the highest bidder is able to put whatever they want on the ballot. So it's going to be equally important. Another equal important dimension, of course, is getting good state legislators in there to help join me in efforts, because that is an alternative pathway to put things on the ballot. And if we can get it that way, we'd save a lot of money on the front end and then focus on the actual campaign part and actually get the message out to folks instead of, some of the more the arduous process of signature gathering, which can be, as we all know, very difficult.
Awesome, thank you for sharing. And we'll have a plug for Community Democracy Project's School for Organizers at the end of this meeting. Thank you all the panelists for sharing your wisdom, our collective knowledge. It's one of our community agreements, and that's how we make our society better, by discussing like this. So thank you to Assemblymember Alex Lee, Christopher Chu, Shawn, and Nicole. And then before we kick off into our breakout rooms, I'd like to have 50+1 Juhi Gupta. Would you be willing to spend 2 minutes kicking us off? I believe you had something to say.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We good? Awesome. Thank you so much to everyone who spoke. I think this conversation is so important and probably could not come at a better time than now. Something I was just thinking about with response to what Nicole was talking about with Yes on 16. Obviously, what Nicole said was that we just did not have enough time to be able to run this kind of massive public education campaign at the same time as doing, persuasion or like GOTV. And that really reminded me of something that Shawn was talking about. He took the words out of my mouth. It shouldn't be, the whole system is so broken because we should not be waiting until election season to be engaging people in conversations about, their local communities or politics. But that is exactly how it happens, every single year, sort of ahead of the primaries, but ahead of the general and election years. We expect people to suddenly tune in, digest so much information from all these competing sources, get all these random texts from organizers that cause us burnout, and then somehow put it all together and vote in this specific way that people want them to vote. And it's totally unsustainable. And especially, I was talking to Nicole about this recently. I feel like this cycle especially made me really disillusioned with electoralism, because it was just totally impossible to be competing with the kind of big money that we saw from, Uber, Lyft, on Prop 22, when they have a direct line into your phones and emails that it's totally impossible to compete, even if you had, the kind of financial resources, the kind of trust and authority that those companies command even right now in the Bay Area. It's just totally impossible. So when Shawn was talking about building that muscle of, participatory democracy and civic engagement, I think that's exactly it. When I think it's gotten a lot better now, actually, with the shift rightward, in our country, I've at least seen in my own community, people kind of a light bulb going off in their head and being oh, this is wrong. We should care about this. We should do something. But still, I think we the people have this abstract principle of, yeah, we should vote, do something good. But I think that connection is not made yet to, oh, I should go to a neighborhood assembly or a town meeting and actually change something potholes on my street or build a new community center.
Perfect. Can I ask you to set us off into our breakout rooms? Can I ask you, what 3 words do you think just energize you in thinking about creating this better world?
Totally. Creativity, agency, and community.
Awesome. Creativity, agency, and community. And I'd like to invite everybody to keep those those words in mind as we kick off into our breakout rooms. I believe if you look at the bottom panel, you should be able to see a button for breakout rooms, and you can join each of those. There's What's Next, Brainstorming, CDP 101, and SIGing 101, Signature Gathering 101. Thank you so much, Juhi, for kicking us off.
And as people are joining, just say that we'll come back with a few minutes to just close out. And if you click on breakout rooms, then on the right side, there'll be a blue number, and that'll be how you click join for whichever room that you want to go into.
And how much time do we have in there?
Till let's say 1:55. So, well, 1:57, 10 minutes.
All right.
Neil, I think you might have to move Kyle into breakout room number 3.
Okay.
Allison and Ember said they don't see the button either.
Tech makes it easier, but it also makes it more difficult for us. The duality.
Shawn, I'm going to put you in the brainstorming room. Put Ember in the brainstorming room. Greer. Brainstorming.
Juhi, were you able to join a breakout room as well?
No, can I be put in 2?
CDP.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Let's see. Nicole.
Yeah, I'll go to the brainstorming one.
Okay. And Allison?
Allison said 1, brainstorming as well.
Actually, maybe. Oops.
Oh, you just kicked him into that one as she was speaking.
Should one of us stay here, or we can both go, I guess, too?
I can stay in here.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the brainstorming one also.
Yeah, I'll stay here for a couple minutes, and then I'll join into a room.
Okay. Actually, I'm gonna go to singing and just tell Kyle and Victoria that's just them.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of people in brainstorming.
This report that you all worked on that was informative for us. So we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, that's right. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah, my name is Greer. I work at Consumer Watchdog. I actually started after they released that report, or after they did most of that report. So I'm really just here to listen and learn. I'm interested in learning more about ideas around e-signature gathering and what's going on with that and how Consumer Watchdog can be involved and support potentially. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Anyone else feel moved to share how they thought the panel went?
I can share. I thought it was really refreshing just to have a ground level conversation and interaction with people. I feel like, especially during quarantine, so much of the conversations we've been having about the political stuff going on has been indirect. And I think a lot of people are in their echo chambers and kind of reinforcing things. So it was good to have an environment where people came together and talked about it. It was really good to have an assembly member and someone who's worked on so many campaigns there to kind of give us the inside view. I thought that was really good. So I think it's a perfect time for the conversation. And I'm really glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, definitely. Did anyone else want to? That just reminded me that like, I like how the panel was put together because it had different perspectives. Like I also liked hearing from Chris about like working in the community and like what inspired them. And like some other people have said, like it's not just a once a year or twice a year thing that we should be having these conversations. Like it's something that we need to like build and like start getting used to. And so this has been an opportunity to start doing that. And then I liked what Blake said about like things blooming, because sometimes you're having conversations with people and you don't realize like what's going to come out of that, but then they have a conversation with someone else and starts building that way. So that's what I got out of that. Anyone else want to share how they're feeling or what they thought? I like to leave pauses too so that people can like think and like digest what other people have said, but we can also like have other conversations about like community democracy projects work or any other organizations people are involved in.
Okay, I can jump in. I was gonna, I think I heard from Nicole about like I'm just thinking about like possibilities around some of the ideas that we've been talking about. And so like possibilities around e-signature gathering, that sounds exciting. And that there's like potential there already, it sounds like, from what you're seeing. And then also hearing from the assembly member about like, that sounds like they considered potentially having initiative process as part of their bill, but that's not actually the way that it needs to get done. And so wanting to dive into, and we talked about this a little bit in CDP, but like dive into more like, okay, well, if that's not the way to do it, what's the way to do it? And is there, like, how do we change those rules for the initiative process? And is it another initiative process that we've been thinking about? And whether or not we or some other group is like ready to take that on.
Yeah, I could just chime in on that a little bit. I mean, I would say a couple things. One is that, even though the kind of cabal of paid signature gathering firms, there's really only like 3 or 4 of them in the state that do probably 90% of the business. They don't have a lot of friends. Like, to be honest with you, there's things that, that happen in politics that are status quo because the system is aligned to support them. That's not necessarily the case with these signature gathering firms. Like, there's not a lot of politicians that have loyalty to them. Most people, labor doesn't have loyalty to them, right? The unions, because when people they think they have to use them for campaigns because they know they can get it done quickly. And sometimes it's laziness, sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's just not having enough time, and so there's no reason why they should set the rules. Like, I really do believe that finding friendly legislators, like Assemblymember Lee, and there's a lot more of them too, that would be open to reforming this process. Like, there's no reason why it needs to be the way that it is. We've got to be able to be creative about that. I do think that there are things that can be done, and I'm not a super expert on this, others would know more, but I could help find out. But like, there's things that can be done legislatively to change the process, and then there's things that need to be done and through an initiative to change the process, right? So I think the first step is probably like getting a sense of what falls into what bucket. and how things can be changed, and then moving forward to change them. But I'm generally an optimistic person, but I do believe that like with COVID and with the anger that a lot of legislators feel about Prop 22, like Assemblymember Lee is he's in the majority around how people feel about that. So, and how the unions feel about it. There's a lot of political clout on our side of reform. So I think it's understanding how it gets done in the best way possible.
Cool, thank you. In case people didn't see, there was a message about 2 more minutes, and then we're going to go into the big room to do a closing statement. But people that haven't shared, if you want to share how you thought the panel went or any ideas that have come up for you. No pressure either. I don't think there were any comments in the chat. Devo.
Does anybody, I'm really interested in just any next steps for reclaiming the initiative process. I think that's what this is all about, but I would love to hear if anybody has any ideas that haven't been talked.
Shawn?
Just one easy question is like, what would a follow-up action be? Like, who needs to be in the room, right? Who are maybe some of the foundation folks that Nicole referenced, maybe some talking to Alex Lee about other folks who he thinks would help us be sort of like a kind of a, yeah. To lay out, okay, these are the 3 different pieces. This is one piece that, that will work through the legislature, and here's another piece that will work through, some kind of initiative that people, like an initiative that we write.
Yeah, and just reading out loud the comment that Ember put in, that it's a big question and we're going to keep having this conversation because we just have like a minute left, but I don't think we're going to come up with all the next steps right now, but definitely connect with Community Democracy Project. And if people want to shout out like a few things, next steps for them or ideas in the last minute that we have.
One thing I was kind of wondering, just with the discussions going on about election fraud and reforming our democracy, just wondering what kind of things we can attach to this feeling that everybody's feeling, this kind of hopelessness and the need for change so that people's voices are heard, and kind of this distrust for the established system, So I agree with everybody that now's a really good time to start thinking about that. And I'm down to join some thinking power with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. Like building that trust again, and like not just giving up on it, but like finding other ways to rebuild it or reclaim it.
Right. And this partisanship, I think people are overloaded with partisanship right now.
All right, we got the countdown, 55 seconds.
We have a follow-up fishbowl for collective wisdom on this very same topic.
We could. You mean like another day? Yeah. If there's interest, we can do it.
I'd be down.
Cool. Well, thanks y'all for sharing your thoughts and ideas for next steps. I think we're going to get sent back to the general room and hear a closing statement from the organizers. See you in there.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you all had a good conversation in your breakout rooms. I was in the brainstorming of what's next, and mainly we just need more time for this conversation, and we tried to do it in an hour what we need many more hours to do. So we'll hopefully have another version of this or a next step coming out of this. I'm just going to share my screen real quick to close us out. And while I do that, actually hand it over to Allison, who has an announcement about School for Organizing, I think.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, I mean, a large part of this conversation was about cultivating the practice of direct democracy. And in that vein, CDP is having a couple of resources that are going to be ongoing this year. One is facilitation trainings, because we believe that being able to facilitate good meetings is a way that we have that collective decision making become like a reality for people, especially, you know, operationalizing the actual like neighborhood assembly to decide, you know, the Oakland city budget. We have to get used to having effective meetings where we can handle competing points of views, know how to like diffuse contention, and yeah, bring together collective wisdom to reach effective action. And secondly, we're going to be having an ongoing School for Organizers, which will just be kind of like both a support and mentorship system where it'll be, you know, skill sharing between mentors and between students, just kind of getting that participatory muscle going. And so it's not just like election time, get into gear. It's like, let's cultivate that practice of ongoing organizing on a consistent basis, so it's not like a huge lift when you know, crisis strikes yet again. So I'm going to throw a form in the chat. Feel free to add your email and which of these, if any, you're interested in, or if you have any questions for us. You can also email us at communitydemocracyproject@gmail.com, and looking forward to hopefully seeing some of you there.
Cool. Thanks, Allison. And I'm aware of time and that we're over, so I'm going to real quick just run through other ways to get involved, to stay in touch. Email us, communitydemocracyproject@gmail.com, if you want to follow up on anything from today, or join CDP's WhatsApp group to stay plugged in. So email us to get plugged into that. There's a bunch of social media ways you can follow, and you can support us by donating. We're not actually a nonprofit, so we're not getting on any of that funding. So we're really just raising support from community members. So feel free to support us there. Thank you, Shawn, for ASL interpretation, to the guest speakers for being here, for all of you. And I've been really loving this quote, so I'm going to share it with you all. When fighting on the side of humanity against the empire of money, we need to go beyond opposition, beyond rebellion, beyond resistance, beyond civic insurrection. Last week, we don't want to be like them. We don't want to become the political class to simply change presidents and switch governments. We want and need to create the other alternative world that is now possible and necessary. We need to exercise power, not take it. And that's from Grace Lee Boggs. Thanks, y'all. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.